There's a painting hanging inside the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg that no art historian can fully explain. It's known as the Great Fire. It depicts Moscow in 1812 burning. But when you really look at it, something is wrong. The fire doesn't behave like fire. The buildings aren't collapsing the way stone buildings collapse. And in the background, barely visible, there's a light. Not orange, not red, not flame. A light that is white, blinding, overexposed. A light that looks disturbingly familiar. I stood in front of that painting for 3 hours. Museum guards watched me like I'd lost my mind. But I couldn't walk away because I had seen that light before. In photographs from Hiroshima, in nuclear test footage, in images of thermal annihilation. That painting, created in 1812, contains the exact visual signature of a nuclear detonation, and no one talks about it. The lie of 1812. We're taught that 1812 was simple history. Napoleon Bonaparte invades Russia. Muskets, cavalry, cannons, a conventional war. We're told winter defeated him. That Russian resistance broke his army. 600,000 soldiers marched in. 10,000 returned. The greatest military disaster in history. Except when you actually examine the evidence. Nothing about 1812 makes sense as a conventional war. Because 1812 wasn't a war. It was an extermination. The systematic incineration of a civilization history refuses to acknowledge. Tartaria, the fires that shouldn't exist. In 1812, catastrophic fires destroyed major cities across the northern hemisphere. Not accidents. Not isolated incidents. Simultaneous, total urban annihilation. Moscow burned for 6 days. So intensely it created its own weather system. Eyewitnesses described winds strong enough to lift grown men off their feet. Stone buildings didn't crack. They melted. Stone does not melt in normal fires. In the same year, New York's Southern District burned overnight. Cause unknown. Philadelphia suffered massive destruction. Baltimore burned. Washington, D.C. burned, so completely the White House had to be rebuilt. Boston, Charleston, New Orleans, multiple catastrophic fires. All officially blamed on war-related accidents. But here's the problem. Russia and America weren't at war with each other. Yet cities on opposite sides of the planet burned at the same time, with the same impossible intensity. Eyewitnesses described the impossible. I began collecting letters, diaries, and newspaper reports from 1812. What people described as horrifying, not because they understood it, but because they didn't. A woman in Moscow wrote, "The light came first, brighter than 1,000 suns. We covered our eyes, but the light burned through our hands. Then came the wind, then came the fire. Brighter than 1,000 suns." That exact phrase wouldn't appear again until Robert Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita after the first nuclear test in 1945. Another witness wrote, "There was a flash that turned night into day. The flash came before the sound. The sound came before the fire. And when the fire came, it came all at once, as if the air itself was burning. Flash before sound. Thermal radiation arriving before the shock wave. That is nuclear physics, described in 1812. A soldier outside Moscow reported, "The trees were burned but still standing. Leaves gone, branches intact, all pointing away from the city center. Radial blast damage, directional force, classic nuclear devastation patterns. The medical evidence they can't explain. A Russian doctor treating survivors documented symptoms no one in 1812 could explain. Burns without flame exposure, skin peeling away in sheets, hair falling out, vomiting blood, death days later with no visible injuries. Others survived the fires, only to die weeks later from a mysterious sickness. That doctor had no concept of radiation, but he perfectly described acute radiation syndrome, the timeline that destroys the official story. History claims Moscow burned because Napoleon's army set fires during retreat, except the timeline destroys that lie. The Great Fire of Moscow began on September 14th, 1812. Napoleon entered the city that same day. The city was already burning, already dead. And here's the final fracture. in the official narrative. Napoleon's army was mostly gone before winter began. The winter came in November. By October, the army had already vanished. 600,000 men didn't freeze. They walked into something far worse. The Great Silence. A buried French military report describes what scouts found advancing into Russia. Entire cities, intact, untouched, completely empty. Food still on tables. Possessions abandoned. No bodies. No battle damage. The report called it the Great Silence. That isn't war. That's evacuation. Evacuation before annihilation. Then came the fires. City after city, Moscow, Kazan, Smolensk, St. Petersburg, destroyed with identical characteristics. Too fast. Too hot. Too complete. Stone liquefied. Metal flowed. Glass formed. Normal fires do not create glass. To vivify stone requires temperatures above 1,400 degrees Celsius, far beyond any 19th century fire. Yet layers of glass were found across Russia in 1812, the scar beneath the cities. Beneath Moscow, St. Petersburg, and every major Russian city lies a layer of ash at the same depth. Archaeologists politely call it a cultural discontinuity of the early 19th century, a moment when civilization simply stopped, and when it restarted, everything was smaller, simpler, inferior, as if something had reset the world. A global event, not a local one. This wasn't just Russia. In South America, the 1812 destruction of Caracas was officially blamed on an earthquake, but a priest wrote, "The ground did not shake. The ground burned. Buildings did not fall. They melted." In the Caribbean, multiple volcanic eruptions occurred simultaneously, unnatural in coordination. In Asia, catastrophic fires struck Delhi, Kolkata, Manila, 1812 to 1813, with the same impossible descriptions. This wasn't regional. This was global. The civilization history erased. The only explanation that fits the evidence is coordinated destruction. A war not between nations, but against a civilization. Tartaria, a global empire with unified architecture, advanced infrastructure, and lost technology. So advanced that conventional war couldn't defeat it. Only total annihilation could. Nuclear annihilation. Ancient texts like the Mahabharata describe weapons of blinding light, scorching wind, and instant death. Ancient sites like Mohenjo-Daro show vitrified ruins and abnormal radiation. And those same signatures appear again in 1812. The cover story. The War of 1812 was a distraction. Napoleon was the cover. While armies marched, Tartarian cities were erased. When the fires cooled and the radiation settled, history was rewritten. Blame Napoleon. Blame accidents. Blame weather. Anything but the truth. The final proof. A British engineer wrote in 1820, "The destruction we attribute to Napoleon's retreat is far beyond what any army could achieve. The cities are not damaged. They are transformed. Beneath the rubble are foundations of structures far greater than what now stands, as if we are rebuilding poorly on the bones of giants." That's not reconstruction. That's replacement. The truth they buried. 1812 was not a war. It was a reset, a global nuclear catastrophe that erased an advanced civilization. And we are living in its aftermath. The paintings remember. The scorch marks remember. The glass layers remember. The eyewitnesses remember. Even if historians lie, the evidence does not. 1812 was nuclear. 1812 was global. 1812 was the end of Tartaria. And modern history begins with a lie.